Commander Zexthai looked at the list on his screen and felt nothing. After 20 years in the Hegemony Enforcement Corps, he had seen too many punishment details to care anymore. The names on the list were just problems being sent away. Far away, he touched the screen and read the first name. Kithara Velanos, a Veltar female who had questioned orders during the Outer Rim campaign. Her file said she had told her superior that attacking civilian targets was wrong. The Hegemony did not like officers who thought too much about right and wrong. The second name made him pause. Morthek Grenhall, a Grendel engineer who had written reports saying the Hegemony wasted too many resources on warships and not enough on colony ships. The reports had reached the High Council before they were stopped. Someone important had been embarrassed. Celia Ethmaran was third on the list. An Etherian scientist barely past her first century. Her crime was studying forbidden subjects. She had tried to prove that some planets marked as dead worlds actually had life. The Hegemony preferred dead worlds to stay dead on paper. It made claiming them easier. Zexthai scrolled through 37 names total. Political dissidents, failed officers, scientists who asked the wrong questions, artists who painted the wrong pictures. All of them were being sent to the same place. He opened another file and read the planet designation. Sol 3, the local species called it Earth. The Galactic database had marked it as a Class 20 death world. Only 3 other planets in known space had earned that rating. One was a gas giant where the storms never stopped. Another was covered in acid that ate through battle armor in minutes. The third was so radioactive that even robots failed within hours. Earth was different. Earth was worse. According to the survey reports, everything on Earth tried to kill visitors. The weather changed without warning. The native life forms were aggressive and adaptable. The planet had survived multiple extinction events and somehow became more dangerous each time. The best part, from the Hegemony's point of view, was that Earth had developed intelligent life. This meant the planet could not be simply destroyed or avoided. The Hegemony had to monitor it according to galactic law. Someone had to go there and stay there and send reports. The someone was always prisoners. Zexthai had been sending punishment. Details to Earth for 5 years. None of them had ever sent a second report. The first reports usually described the hostile environment and dangerous native creatures, then silence. The Hegemony assumed they died quickly. This was considered a feature, not a problem. He approved the transfer order and closed the file. In 3 days, 37 problems would become Sol 3's problems instead. 3 days later, Kithara sat in the transport ship's cargo bay and watched her fellow prisoners. They came from a dozen different species, but they all had the same look. They knew they were going to die. The Veltar soldier next to her was young. His crime had been deserting during a battle against civilians. He kept staring at his hands and shaking. Across the bay, 2 Grendel engineers sat together and spoke in low voices about structural calculations. They had been caught building homes for refugees instead of weapon factories. Celia sat alone near the front of the bay. The Etherian's pale blue skin looked almost white under the harsh lights. She held a small data pad and read constantly. Kithara wondered what knowledge could be worth reading on the way to death. The transport captain's voice came through the speakers. Approaching Sol 3 system. Prepare for final approach. Kithara looked through the small window near her seat. She saw a yellow star that looked like any other star. Then she saw the planets. The third planet from the star was blue and white and green. It looked beautiful. It looked peaceful. It looked like a lie. Listen up, the captain announced. Sol 3 makes no distinction between prisoners and food. The Hegemony has given you standard survival equipment and a basic shelter fabricator. Your job is to build a monitoring station and send weekly reports about the native species development. Your actual job is to stay alive as long as possible. The captain paused. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. The average survival time on Sol 3 is 43 days. The record is 96 days. Don't try to be heroes. Just try to die slowly. The ship shook as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the window, Kithara watched clouds race past. The clouds looked normal until she realized how fast they were moving. The weather systems on this planet moved with tremendous energy. Then she saw the surface. Mountains that reached into the clouds. Forests that stretched beyond the horizon. Oceans that covered more than half the planet. It looked like paradise, but Kithara had read the files. Those mountains had avalanches that buried entire valleys. The forests contained predators that hunted in packs and could track scents across vast distances. The oceans had creatures larger than spaceships and weather that could sink fleets. The worst part was winter. Half the planet froze every year. Temperatures dropped low enough to freeze most known biological fluids. Then it warmed up and froze again. The native life had somehow adapted to this cycle. Everything else died. The ship landed hard on what the sensors said was solid ground. Kithara felt the impact through her seat. Outside the windows, she saw white. Snow covered everything as far as she could see. "Winter season," the captain announced. "Lucky you?" The locals call this mild weather because the temperature is only 30 degrees below your species' freezing point. Don't go outside without full environmental protection. Don't stay outside longer than necessary. Don't trust anything that moves. The cargo bay doors opened with a grinding sound. Cold air rushed in despite the ship's atmospheric shields. Kithara felt the cold through her insulated suit. It was like being touched by space itself. One by one, the prisoners filed out of the ship. Their equipment was already on the ground, dropped by automated systems, shelter fabricators, food synthesizers, communication equipment, weapons that would probably be useless against local predators. Kithara was the last to leave the ship. She stood in the doorway and looked at the landscape. Snow-covered rolling hills that disappeared into white sky. Dark shapes that might be trees broke the horizon. Nothing moved. Nothing made sound except the wind. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. It was also the most terrifying. The ship's engines powered up behind her. She stepped onto the snow and felt it crunch under her boots. The transport lifted off immediately, eager to leave this place. Within minutes, it was a bright spot disappearing into the gray sky. Kithara looked around at her fellow exiles. 37 beings. From across the galaxy, standing in the snow on a Deathworld, watching their only way home disappear. Morthic spoke first. His voice was calm despite everything. "We should build the shelters before dark. The temperature will drop further when the sun sets." Celia looked up from her datapad. According to the local climate data, this region experiences temperature swings of 40 degrees between day and night. We have approximately 6 hours of daylight remaining. The young Valtar soldier laughed. It was not a happy sound. 6 hours to build shelters that might last until morning. Then we get to try to survive until the next morning. And the morning after that. Kithara picked up a shelter fabricator and began walking toward higher ground. Then we better get started. Behind her, she heard the others gathering their equipment. They were all dead beings walking. They just had not stopped breathing yet. But until they did stop breathing, they might as well work. After all, they had reports to write. The first night on Earth almost killed them all. Kithara had thought she understood cold. Her homeworld had winter seasons that lasted months, but Earth's cold was different. It went through their environmental suits like they were made of paper. It made the air hurt to breathe. It made metal crack and electronics fail. By morning, 3 of the prisoners had hypothermia despite their heating units. Morthic's engineering equipment had frozen solid. 2 shelter fabricators had stopped working completely. "We need to move to lower elevation," Celia said, checking her instruments. "The wind patterns here are too severe for our equipment." Kithara looked around at the white landscape. Everything looked the same. Hills covered in snow, trees that looked dead, and a sky that promised more snow. "Which direction?" Celia pointed south. "The thermal readings suggest warmer air currents in that valley. We might find shelter from the wind." It took them 3 hours to move their equipment down the slope. The snow was deeper than it looked. Several times, prisoners sank up to their waists in hidden drifts. The young Valtar soldier fell through what looked like solid ground into a stream of ice water. They had to pull him out before he froze. "This planet is actively trying to kill us," he said through chattering teeth. "All planets try to kill visitors," Morthic replied, checking his equipment for damage. "This one is just better at it." They found a spot between two hills that blocked some of the wind. The shelter fabricators worked long enough to create a basic dome structure. It was not comfortable, but it kept out most of the cold. On the second day, they sent out survey drones according to hegemony protocol. The drones were supposed to map the area and identify any dangerous life forms. 3 of the 6 drones failed. To return, the other 3 sent back images that made no sense. "Look at this," Celia said, staring at her screen. The drone found structures, geometric shapes that appear to be artificial. Kithara studied the images. They showed rectangular shapes covered in snow. Some were small, others were large. They were arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence. Native settlements? The database says the native species is pre-industrial. These structures suggest advanced construction techniques. Morthic looked over their shoulders. Maybe the species developed faster than the database indicates. That happens sometimes. What the database did not tell them was that they had landed near a small Canadian town called Pine Ridge. The structures their drones had found were houses, barns, and a school. The natives were not pre-industrial primitives. They were humans. On winter vacation. On the 3rd day, the natives found them. Kithara was outside the shelter, trying to repair a communication array that had frozen overnight. The work required her to remove her gloves, which meant her hands would start freezing within minutes. She was focused on the delicate electronics when she heard voices. Human voices. She looked up and saw 3 figures walking toward their camp. They moved easily through the snow, despite wearing what looked like primitive clothing. They carried long poles and had large flat objects attached to their feet. Kithara reached for her weapon, then stopped. The figures were not approaching. Like hunters or warriors, they moved casually, calling out in what sounded like friendly tones. "Hello there!" One of them shouted. "You folks okay? We saw your lights from the trail." Kithara understood the words. The hegemony's translation implants worked on most known languages. But she could not understand why these native predators were talking instead of attacking. The 3 humans stopped about 10 meters away. They were tall creatures, taller than most galactic species. They had pale skin that looked almost blue from the cold, but they did not seem bothered by temperatures that had nearly killed 3 prisoners. "We're from Pine Ridge," the first human said. He was older, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. "Saw your campfire last night. This is pretty rough country for camping in winter." "Campfire?" Kithara realized he meant their heating units. The humans had seen the glow and assumed it was a primitive fire. The second human was younger and female. She carried a large pack that steamed in the cold air. "We brought some hot chocolate and extra gear. You guys look like you might need it." The third human was studying their shelter with obvious interest. "That's quite a setup you have. Never seen a dome tent like that. Is it some kind of military surplus?" Kithara stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. These were first contact protocols, though not the kind the hegemony had taught her. She was supposed to avoid detection by primitive species. She was not supposed to have conversations with them. "We are ... she began, then stopped. "How could?" She explained that they were galactic prisoners sent to monitor a Deathworld. "We're researchers," Morthic said, emerging from the shelter. The Grendel's 6 limbs and massive frame should have terrified the humans. Instead, they looked fascinated. "No kidding?" the older human said. "What kind of research?" "Climate studies," Celia said quickly, following Morthic outside. Her pale blue skin and large eyes made her look obviously alien, but the humans just nodded politely. "Makes sense," the younger human said. "This has been a weird winter. Colder than usual, and the storm patterns are all mixed up." She opened her pack and pulled out a metal container. Steam rose from it when she removed the lid. "Hot chocolate," she said, offering it to Kithara. "It'll warm you right up." Kithara stared at the container. The liquid inside was dark brown and smelled strange. According to her suit's sensors, it contained several compounds that were mildly toxic to most galactic species. The humans were offering her poison. "It's okay," the older human said, noticing her hesitation. "My wife made it this morning." "Added extra marshmallows?" "Marshmallows?" Kithara's translation implant struggled with the word. "Some kind of additional toxin?" The young human was looking at their equipment with obvious admiration. "That's some serious gear you have there. Those heating units look incredibly efficient. And that communication array, is that experimental technology?" "Very experimental," Morthic said carefully. "Cool," the human said. "I'm Jake, by the way. This is my dad, Tom, and my sister, Sarah." Names. The predators were giving them names. Kithara knew this was significant, but she was not sure why. "I'm Kithara," she said slowly. "This is Morthic and Cilia. Nice to meet you," Sarah said. She was still holding out the container of hot chocolate. "You really should drink this. You look half frozen." The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around them. The humans barely seemed to notice, but Kithara felt the cold cutting through her suit like knives. "Storm's coming in," Tom said, looking at the sky. "Pretty big one from the look of those clouds. You folks might want to think about heading into town until it passes." "Town?" Cilia asked. "Pine Ridge," Jake explained, "about 5 kilometers that way. Community center has heat and hot food. Mrs. Patterson always makes extra soup for travelers." Kithara tried to process this information. The natives were inviting them into their settlement. This was either an elaborate trap or the strangest predatory behavior she had ever encountered. "We appreciate the offer," Morthic said diplomatically, "but we need to stay with our equipment." "Your choice," Tom said, "but that storm's going to be a big one. Temperature is supposed to drop another 20 degrees and the wind will be brutal." Sarah finally gave up on offering the hot chocolate to Kithara and handed it to Morthic instead. The Grendel accepted it politely, though he had no intention of drinking alien toxins. "Tell you what," Jake said. "We'll be skiing back this way tomorrow morning. If you change your minds, just flag us down. We can guide you to town." "Skiing?" Cilia asked. Jake pointed to the flat objects on their feet. "These are skis. They help you move through snow. Been doing it since I was 5 years old." "You move through this environment for recreation?" Kithara asked. "Best skiing in the province," Sarah said proudly. "Nothing like a good powder day to make you feel alive." The humans said goodbye and continued on their way, moving through the snow like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kithara watched them disappear over a ridge, moving faster than their vehicles could manage in these conditions. That night, the storm hit. The wind howled around their shelter like a living thing trying to get inside. The temperature dropped so low that their heating units struggled to keep up. 2 more pieces of equipment failed completely. Inside the dome, 37 Galactic prisoners huddled together and listened to the storm rage outside. They had expected Earth to try to kill them, but they had not expected it to do so with such enthusiasm. "Those natives," the young Veltar said through chattering teeth. "They walked through this weather like it was nothing." "They offered us food and shelter," Cilia said quietly. "Why would predators do that?" Kithara pulled her thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind made sounds like screaming. "Maybe we don't understand what kind of predators they are." None of them slept that night. They listened to the storm and wondered what kind of species evolved on a planet where this was considered normal weather. In the morning, the storm passed. The humans returned, just as they had promised. They brought more hot chocolate, some kind of baked food items, and worried expressions. "You guys made it through okay?" Tom asked, looking at their damaged equipment. "We survived," Kithara said. "Good to hear," Sarah said. "But seriously, the next storm system looks even worse." 3 weeks after first contact, Kithara sat in what the humans called a cabin and tried to understand what she was seeing. The cabin belonged to Tom and his family. It was made of dead trees stacked on top of each other. The humans had somehow convinced the local plant life to become their shelter. Inside, a fire burned in a metal box, heating the entire structure. The heat came from burning more dead plants. This should not work, Celia whispered to her in Veltar. Wood combustion cannot provide adequate thermal regulation for habitable spaces, but it did work. The cabin was warmer than their advanced shelter had ever been, and the humans had built it using nothing but materials they found lying around on the ground. Jake sat across from them, drinking more of the toxic brown liquid they called coffee. He had been drinking it all morning. By Kithara's count, he had consumed enough caffeine to put a Grendel into cardiac arrest. But Jake just looked more alert and energetic. "So you're really studying climate change?" he asked. "That's pretty cool. Dad thinks the weather patterns have been weird lately, too." Kithara nodded carefully. They had been maintaining the story that they were researchers. It was easier than explaining they were galactic prisoners sent to die. "The thermal variations are significant," she said. "Yeah, this winter's been brutal," Sarah agreed. She was also drinking coffee while doing something she called knitting. Her hands moved quickly, turning simple string into complex patterns. "But that's Canada for you. The weather's always trying to kill you." The casual way she said it made Kithara's skin crawl. Sarah spoke about lethal weather the way most people talked about minor inconveniences. Tom came in from outside, carrying an armload of frozen wood. Snow covered his clothing, but he was not wearing the full environmental protection that the aliens needed. Just simple cloth layers and animal skins. "Storm's coming tonight," he announced. "Big one. Temperature's going to drop to -40. "-40? Morthic asked. He had been studying the cabin's construction with obvious fascination. "Celsius," Tom clarified. "That's about -40 Fahrenheit, too. Funny how those numbers meet up right there." Kithara did rapid calculations in her head. -40 degrees was cold enough to freeze most biological fluids. It was cold enough to make most metals brittle. It was cold enough to shut down most technology. "Will you be safe?" she asked. The humans laughed. Not cruel laughter, but genuinely amused laughter. "We'll be fine," Sarah said. "Just means we need to bring the animals inside and make sure the pipes don't freeze." Animals. Kithara had seen them around the human settlement. Large four-legged creatures that the humans kept in wooden enclosures. According to the Galactic database, they were called horses and were classified as megafauna herbivores, capable of crushing most smaller life forms. The humans used them for transportation. "How do you control the megafauna?" she asked. "Megafauna?" Jake looked confused. "You mean the horses?" "The large four-legged crushing machines." Jake's confusion deepened. "Horses don't crush things, well, except by accident sometimes. They're pretty gentle once you know how to handle them." "You domesticated apex predators?" "Horses aren't predators," Sarah explained patiently. "They eat grass. They're prey animals, actually. That's why they spook so easily." Kithara felt her worldview shifting. The massive creatures she had assumed weapons were actually food sources for the real predators. What hunts them? "Used to be wolves and cougars mostly," Tom said. "But we've got most of the predators under control now." "Under control?" "Yeah, we relocated the wolves to the national park. Cougars are still around, but they mostly avoid humans." "Smart animals." Celia leaned forward. "You forced apex predators to relocate?" "Well, we didn't force them exactly," Tom said. "We just made it clear they weren't welcome around the livestock. Most of them got the message." Their conversation was interrupted by a scratching sound at the door. Tom opened it, and a large furry creature bounded inside. It had sharp teeth, pointed ears, and the general body structure of a Volf. Kithara reached for her weapon, but stopped when she saw the human's reaction. They were smiling. "Hey there, Rex," Sarah said, scratching the creature behind its ears. "Did you miss us?" The Volf creature wagged its tail and made happy whining sounds. It walked over to Jake and put its massive head on his lap. "This is our dog," Jake explained, seeing the alien's shocked expressions. "He's a German shepherd, best guard dog in the county." Dog. Kithra's translation implant had been struggling with that word for weeks. Now she understood why. It was not translating correctly because the concept did not exist in galactic civilization. The humans had somehow convinced wolves to live with them. and the wolves seemed happy about it. "You domesticated wolves?" Morthek asked. His voice was very quiet. "Dogs aren't wolves exactly," Tom said. "But yeah, they evolved from wolves. Happened thousands of years ago. Now they're man's best friend." Man's best friend? A wolf was man's best friend? Kithara tried to process this information and failed. The dog noticed the aliens and walked over to investigate. It sniffed Kithara's hand, then sat down and looked at her expectantly. "He wants you to pet him," Sarah said. "Just run your hand over his fur. He likes that." Kithara slowly reached out and touched the creature's head. Its fur was soft and warm. The wolf did not try to bite her. Instead, it made a low rumbling sound that Jake called purring. Though he corrected himself and said that was actually cats who purred, there were more domesticated predators over the next hour. Kithara learned about the impossible ecosystem the humans had created. They kept wolves as companions. They maintained colonies of what they called bees that produced food in exchange for protection. They had convinced various bird species to live near their settlements and eat insects. "The chickens are funny," Sarah said. "They're descendants of jungle fowl, but now they just wander around the yard eating bugs and laying eggs for us." "You convince flying creatures to produce food for you?" "Pretty much. Though I think they figured out they get better protection and food security living with us. Smart birds." That evening, as the promised storm arrived, Kithara watched the humans prepare. They brought their animals inside larger structures. They checked heating systems that burned local plant matter. They prepared food using ingredients that would poison most galactic species, and they did it all while talking and laughing, as if lethal weather was just another part of daily life. "Pass the hot sauce," Jake said during dinner. Kithara watched him pour a red liquid onto his food. Her sensors identified it as containing capsaicin, a chemical compound that caused severe pain in most nerve systems. Jake ate it voluntarily. "Too spicy?" Sarah asked, noticing Kithra's expression. "Why do you consume pain-causing chemicals?" "It tastes good," Jake said simply. "Plus it clears your sinuses." After dinner, Tom showed them what he called his workshop. It was filled with tools and machines that worked without electronics. Everything was mechanical, powered by human muscle or burning plant matter. "Built this cabin myself," he said proudly. "Took 3 summers, but it's solid. Should last 100 years if the foundation stays good." 3 summers. He had built a permanent structure capable of protecting against lethal weather using only local materials and hand tools. The hegemony's emergency shelters were designed by teams of engineers and manufactured in orbital facilities. Tom's was better. You know how to build such things?" Morthek asked. "Learned from my dad, mostly." He learned from his dad. Been passed down in the family for generations. Generational knowledge transfer, skills accumulated over centuries. Kithara realized that these humans were not just surviving their death world by accident. They had been fighting it for thousands of years, learning its secrets, adapting to its challenges, and they had won. Outside, the storm raged with enough force to destroy buildings. Inside, the humans played something they called cards and drank more coffee. The dog slept by the fire. The domesticated predator seemed completely unconcerned about the weather that could kill most galactic species. "You know what's weird?" Jake said, dealing another hand. "You guys seem really impressed by basic stuff. I mean, it's just camping gear and farm life." Camping gear, farm life. To the humans, surviving on a Class 20 death world was so routine they had casual names for it. "Your planet is classified as extremely dangerous," Celia said carefully. "Dangerous?" Sarah laughed. "I guess if you're not prepared. But that's true anywhere, right? You just have to know what you're doing. Know what you're doing." As if survival on a death world was simply a matter of education. Later that night, lying in sleeping bags that the humans had insisted they borrow, Kithara listened to the storm outside. The wind howled with enough force to topple trees. The temperature was low enough to kill them in minutes without protection, but inside the wooden cabin built by hand tools, drinking liquid that should have been toxic, surrounded by domesticated Predators, she was warm and safe. The humans had not just survived Earth, they had conquered it so completely that they forgot it was supposed to be impossible. Kithara? Celia whispered in the darkness. I have been analyzing the humans' metabolic processes. What did you find? They are not adapted to this environment. Kithara sat up. What do you mean? Their biology is similar to tropical species. They should require much. 2 months later, Morthic was learning to ice skate. This was not something he had planned. Grendels were not built for sliding across frozen water. They had 6 legs, weighed 300 pounds, and their idea of winter sports involved staying inside by a fire, but the human children had insisted. And just push with one foot, then the other, 8-year-old Emma said patiently. She was barely tall enough to reach Morthic's lowest elbow, but she skated backwards in front of him like it was the easiest thing in the world. Morthic tried to follow her instructions. His first leg slipped forward. His second leg slipped sideways. His third leg went somewhere else entirely. He crashed onto the ice with a sound like a small building falling down. The human children cheered. That was way better than last time. Emma said, You only fell once getting to the middle of the pond. Only once. Morthic had fallen 17 times getting to the middle of the pond the day before. By human standards, this was dramatic improvement. He got back to his feet, or rather his 6 feet. Around the edges of the frozen pond, other aliens were attempting various human activities with similar results. Celia was building something the humans called a snowman with help from the local librarian. The young Veltar soldier was learning to use skis under the careful instruction of Jake's father. Kithara stood at the edge of the ice, watching everyone with the expression of someone whose universe had been turned upside down and shaken. Still, Can't believe they're teaching us recreation, she said to Morthic as he slid past her. Recreation that could kill us, he replied, wobbling dangerously. Everything here could kill us. That's the point. It had taken the aliens 6 weeks to understand what the humans were doing. They were not just helping the stranded researchers survive, they were adopting them. The entire town of Pine Ridge had somehow decided that 37 galactic outcasts were now their responsibility. Nobody had asked the aliens if they wanted to be adopted. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the community center, had appointed herself as their cultural guide. She was a small human female who looked fragile but seemed to be made of iron and determination. She had taken one look at their survival rations and declared them unfit for human consumption. You can't live on food pills and protein paste, she had said. What you need is proper cooking. Proper cooking, it turned out, involved taking raw materials and applying heat, chemical reactions, and what humans called seasoning to create edible results. The alien censors said most human food should poison them. Their stomachs said otherwise. Celia had spent 3 days analyzing Mrs. Patterson's soup before finally admitting it was nutritionally superior to their emergency rations. How did she know what nutrients we needed? Celia had asked. I asked Dr. Kim to look at your medical scans, Mrs. Patterson had replied matter-of-factly. Then I adjusted the recipe. Wasn't that complicated? Dr. Kim was the town's medical professional. He had examined all 37 aliens with the casual competence of someone who dealt with strange new species every day. When Kithara asked about his experience with non-human biology, he had laughed. Biology is biology, he had said. Carbon-based. Life follows the same basic rules everywhere. Plus, I used to work in the city, seen weirder things than you folks. The city. Apparently, there were places on Earth where even stranger things happened. Jake found Kithara at the edge of the pond and handed her a pair of ice skates. Come on, he said. Emma's been asking when you're going to try. I am a military strategist. Kithara said, I do not participate in recreational activities. Used to be a military strategist, Jake corrected gently. Now you're just Kithara, and Kithara should learn to have fun. Fun? The humans were obsessed with this concept. They engaged in activities that served no survival purpose and called them fun. They seemed to think everyone should participate in fun, whether they wanted to or not. Kithara took the skates. They were clearly designed for human feet, but Humans had somehow modified them to fit her different anatomy. She did not remember anyone measuring her feet. "How did you know my size?" "Dad's good with leather work," Jake said. "Plus, we've been watching you walk around for 2 months. Easy enough to figure out?" They had been watching, learning, adapting their equipment to accommodate alien physiology. The same way they adapted everything else to their impossible world. Kithara sat down and put on the skates. The boots were lined with some kind of soft fur that kept her feet warm despite the freezing temperatures. More dead animals turned into useful tools. "Ready?" Jake asked that she was not ready. She would never be ready. But the human children were watching expectantly, and somehow that made it impossible to refuse. Jake helped her onto the ice. Unlike Mortha, Kithara had only 2 legs to coordinate. This should have made balance easier. It did not. She fell immediately. The human children applauded anyway. "Great start!" Emma called out. "Now, try pushing with your legs instead of just standing there. Try pushing with your legs." As if controlled movement on frictionless surfaces was something anyone could learn, but over the next hour, Kithara found herself improving. Not because the activity became easier, but because the humans refused to let her fail quietly. Every time she fell, someone helped her up. Every time she managed 2 consecutive strides, someone cheered. By the end of the afternoon, she was moving across the ice under her own power. Slowly, clumsily, but successfully. "See?" Jake said as they sat by the warming fire afterward. Fun. That evening, the aliens gathered in what had become their unofficial headquarters, the back room of Patterson's restaurant. Mrs. Patterson had cleared out storage space and set up tables where they could work on their equipment and hold meetings. She had also installed a coffee machine. "We need to talk," Kithara said, once everyone had assembled. "About our situation." The other aliens looked at her expectantly. Over the past weeks, Kithara had become their unofficial leader. Not because anyone had appointed her, but because she was the only one who seemed to understand the strategic implications of their circumstances. "We have been here for 8 weeks, she continued. "We have sent exactly 0 reports to the hegemony." This was true. They were supposed to file weekly reports about the native species development. Instead, they had been learning to ice skate and eat human food. "The hegemony expects us to die," said the young Veltar soldier. His name was Ren, and he had changed considerably since arriving on Earth. He no longer shook when he spoke. "Our silence confirms their expectations." "Does it?" Celia asked quietly. "Or does our silence mean we have gone native?" Gone native. It was an old military term for soldiers who abandoned their duties and joined local populations. The hegemony considered it a form of treason. "We haven't gone native," Morthic said. "We've just dotted to local conditions." "By learning recreational activities and eating toxic food?" "By surviving," Kithara said firmly, "which is more than anyone expected us to do." She looked around the room at her fellow exiles. They looked different than they had 8 weeks ago, healthier, stronger, less afraid. Ren had learned to operate human machinery and was helping with snow removal around town. Several of the Grendel engineers were working with local craftsmen, sharing knowledge about construction techniques. The Etherian scientists had been invited to collaborate with the town's small research station. They were not just surviving. They were contributing. "There's something else," Celia said hesitantly. "I've been monitoring our communication equipment." We should have heard from other hegemony monitoring stations by now. "Other stations?" "Earth is not the only world being monitored. There are stations on 6 other Class 15 and higher worlds. They report on schedule every week." "And?" "They stopped reporting 3 months ago, all of them." The room fell silent. 6 monitoring stations on 6 different death worlds had all gone silent around the same time. "Equipment failure," Morthic suggested. "Simultaneous equipment failure on 6 different worlds?" Celia shook her head. "The probability is essentially 0. Kithara felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. What if it wasn't equipment failure? Then what? What if the hegemony has been using death worlds as disposal sites for longer than we thought? What if there are other groups like us, scattered across the galaxy? The implications were staggering. If she was right, the hegemony had been sending dissidents to die on impossible worlds for years. The monitoring mission was just an excuse to make the punishment seem official. But if that's true, Ren said slowly, then why aren't the other stations reporting? Kithara thought about ice skating lessons and modified boots and children who cheered when aliens fell down. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's soup and Dr. Kim's casual competence and Jake's patient explanations of recreational activities. Maybe, she said carefully, the other worlds have their own versions of humans. The aliens stared at her. Species that don't just survive impossible conditions, she continued. Species that thrive on them. Species that adopt stranded aliens and teach them to have fun. That single quotes s double quote again, then stopped. Actually, that would explain a lot. It would explain why the hegemony classifies these worlds as death worlds, Morthok agreed. Not because of the environment, but because of what happens to people who go there. They change, Kithara said. They learn that impossible things are just. 2 years later, the hegemony came back. Kithara was teaching Emma basic hand-to-hand combat when the ships appeared in the sky. 3 massive vessels that blotted out the afternoon sun over Pine Ridge. Their hulls were black metal marked with the red symbols of the enforcement corps. Wow, Emma said, shading her eyes to look up. Those are big ships. Are those your friends? Friends? Kithara almost laughed. No, Emma, those are not friends. The ships settled into a triangular formation above the town. Landing boats began dropping from their bellies, heading for the open field where the aliens had first crashed, where they had built their original shelters before the humans adopted them. Should we be worried? Emma asked. She was 9 years old now and had grown 3 inches since Kithara first met her. She could ice skate backwards, build snow forts, and disarm an adult Veltar without breaking a sweat. Yes, Kithara said. We should be very worried. The emergency sirens began wailing across Pine Ridge, not because of the alien ships, but because it was Saturday afternoon and the volunteer fire department was having their weekly drill. The timing was either perfect or terrible, depending on how you looked at it. Jake came running across the field, still wearing his firefighter gear. Those are hegemony ships, aren't they? Yes. Are they here for you? Yes, Jake nodded calmly, like this was something he had expected. Better get everyone together then. Figure out what we're dealing with. What they were dealing with was Commander Zexthai and 50 Enforcement Corps soldiers, the same commander who had signed their death warrants 2 years ago. He stepped out of the lead landing boat wearing full combat armor and carrying enough weapons to level a small city. He looked around at the peaceful human town with obvious confusion. The main street was decorated for the upcoming harvest festival. Children were playing in the snow-covered park. Humans walked their dogs and carried shopping bags and acted like giant warships in their sky were perfectly normal. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her restaurant, carrying a tray of fresh cookies and a thermos of coffee. She walked straight up to the heavily armed aliens and smiled. You boys must be cold after that long trip, she said. Would you like something warm to drink? Commander Zexthai stared at her. She was offering food to an invasion force. This was not in any of his tactical manuals. We are here on official hegemony business, he announced in his most intimidating voice. Stand aside, primitive. Mrs. Patterson looked him up and down like she was evaluating a particularly troublesome teenager. No need to be rude, dear. I'm sure we can work this out over coffee and cookies. Work what out? Whatever brings you all this way with so many guns. Behind the commander, his soldiers were looking around nervously. They had been briefed to expect hostile primitives and dangerous wildlife. Instead, they were being offered baked goods by someone's grandmother. Kithara appeared at the edge of the landing zone. Flanked by Jake and Tom, she was not wearing her old hegemony uniform. Instead, she wore the practical winter clothing that the humans had taught her to prefer. Warm, flexible, and designed for actual living rather than military intimidation. Commander, she said formally, you are a long way from hegemony space. Zexthai turned to face her, and his confusion deepened. The last time he had seen Kithara, she had been a broken political prisoner being shipped off to die. Now she looked healthy, confident, and strangely at ease. "Agent Velenos," he said, "you are alive?" "I am. Your unit failed to report." "We did. 37 Hegemony personnel have been missing for 2 years. The High Council demands answers." Kithara glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. Over the past 2 years, they had prepared for this moment. The humans had helped them think through various scenarios and responses. "We are not missing," she said. "We are here." "Here? On this Deathworld?" "This is Pine Ridge, Ontario, Canada. Earth. Population 2,000 and counting." Zexthai looked around again, houses with smoke rising from chimneys. Humans going about their daily business, dogs barking in the distance. It looked like a thriving community, not a death world. Where are the hostile life forms? Which ones? The database lists this planet as Class 20, extreme environmental hazards, aggressive fauna, lethal weather patterns. Jake stepped forward. "Sorry, but I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is just Canada. It's pretty peaceful here." "Canada? Part of Earth. We're actually having a harvest festival next week. You're welcome to stay if you want." Commander Zexthai was a veteran of 20 campaigns across hostile worlds. He had faced down rebel armies and conquered civilizations. He was not prepared for someone inviting him to a festival. "This is not a social visit," he said firmly. "We are here to retrieve Hegemony personnel and investigate their failure to report." "Oh, that," Kithara said. "We can explain that." She gestured toward the town center, where the other former prisoners were emerging from buildings and gathering in the street. They moved with the easy confidence of people who belong somewhere. Morthak came from the direction of the construction site, where he had been helping build a new school. His 6 limbs were covered in sawdust, and his mandibles were stained with coffee. He looked nothing like the broken engineer who had been sent here to die. Celia emerged from the library, carrying an armload of books and followed by 3 human children who were asking questions about orbital mechanics. She had been running a science program for local students while conducting her own research into human educational methods. Ren appeared from the fire station, still wearing his volunteer firefighter uniform. He had become the town's expert on emergency preparedness, which mostly involved teaching humans that their casual approach to dangerous situations could be improved with proper planning. One by one, all 37 former prisoners assembled in the town center. They looked healthy, purposeful, and completely uninterested in being rescued. "As you can see," Kithara said, "we are all accounted for." "You were sent here on a monitoring mission," Zexthai said. His voice was rising. "Where are your reports on native species development?" "We filed them," Celia said helpfully. "Every week for the first month. We received nothing." "Check your filters. You might have been screening out reports that contradicted your database." Zexthai's aide whispered something in his ear about communication logs. The commander's expression grew darker. "Even if reports were filed, you were ordered to maintain surveillance from a safe distance. Not to integrate with the native population. Safe distance?" Morthak laughed. "Commander, there is no safe distance on Earth. Everything here is trying to kill you. The only way to survive is to let the humans teach you how. The humans are primitive." "The humans," said a new voice, "are standing right here and can speak for themselves." Dr. Kim had arrived, along with the mayor and several other town officials. They did not look primitive. They looked like people who were getting tired of being talked about in the third person. "Dr. Kim," Kithara said, "this is Commander Zexthai." "Of the Hegemony Enforcement Corps? Commander, this is Dr. Kim, Pine Ridge's Chief Medical Officer and our Cultural Integration Specialist." "Cultural Integration Specialist?" Dr. Kim smiled. "Someone had to make sure our new residents adapted properly to local conditions. Fascinating physiologies, by the way. Completely different evolutionary paths, but the same basic medical needs." "You studied them?" "We studied each other. Very educational exchange." I've learned more about comparative biology in 2 years than I did in 20 years of medical school. Commander Zexthai was beginning to understand that this situation was completely outside his experience. You were sent here to die, he said bluntly to Cathara. This was a punishment assignment. You were supposed to establish a monitoring post and perish from environmental hazards. The humans stopped moving. The friendly expressions on their faces disappeared. I'm sorry, Mayor Williams said in a very quiet voice. Did you just say you sent these people here to die? They are political prisoners. This planet was chosen specifically because it would eliminate them while maintaining the pretense of a legitimate mission. The temperature in the town square seemed to drop several degrees. But it was not the weather causing the chill. Jake stepped closer to the commander. You sent our friends here hoping they would die? They are not your friends. They are hegemony. Property. Property? Tom moved to stand beside his son. Then Mrs. Patterson joined them. Then Dr. Kim. Then more humans began gathering, until the hegemony soldiers were surrounded by increasingly angry-looking civilians. Let me make sure I understand this, Mayor Williams said. You dumped 37 people on our planet, hoping our environment would kill them for you. It was an efficient solution to a personnel problem. Efficient solution? Mrs. Patterson's voice could have frozen steel. You tried to murder our neighbors? They are criminals. They are Cathara and Morthic and Celia, Emma said, pushing through the crowd of adults. They are my friends. Cathara taught me to fight, and Morthic helped me with my science project, and Celia reads me stories. Commander Zexthai looked down at the human child. She was small and appeared defenseless, but something in her eyes made him take a step backward. This does not concern you, primitive. This is our town, Emma said firmly. That makes it our concern. More humans were arriving. The volunteer fire department? The local